You made the point, which is 100% accurate, and I don't understand. I don't think people fully grasp it. The amount of need for AI is infinite. It will never end. It's like saying, when will you have solved every problem? If we solve going to Mars, we'll try to solve going to Saturn. We'll try to solve, there's infinite amounts of electricity that's needed to put it into that category. And right now, we have capacity constraints showing up at every company level.
Hello everyone, this is BTC Insight, and welcome to yet another deep dive into BTC Insight. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. You won't want to miss this.
Visser's central numeric argument starts with the global build-out of data centers over the next 5 years, roughly a $5 trillion commitment when including China. Within that, compute hardware accounts for roughly 30 to 60%. Using the conservative lower bound of 30%, that suggests about $1.5 trillion directed to compute alone. Even if Nvidia's current near 90% data center market share were to drop dramatically to 50%, the implied revenue pool by 2030 would still be roughly $750 billion, far above many current estimates near $425 billion.
I actually don't think Nvidia is ever going to get quote unquote expensive. The simple reason, if you look out 5 years, right now we have total spend that's going to happen around the globe, including China, of about $5 trillion, the way it looks right now. Nvidia and the data center build out of $5 trillion, Nvidia right now has a moat around the data center build out, despite what people are talking about today in TPUs, and I'll go through that. But compute as a percentage of the spend for a data center is anywhere from 30 to 60%. So let's take the conservative side and say it'll go down to 30 over time. So that's $1.5 trillion in compute spend, of which Nvidia right now has about a 90% market share on data centers. The reason they have such a big moat on data centers is until today, when Meta basically is going to get some TPUs from Google, there's really no experience with any competitors for Nvidia other than TPUs on these clusters that are massive. So if you're in a race, a 5-year race, and you've got to do this for or risk obsolescence, the last thing you're going to do is buy semiconductors from some company that's never been successful in a data center. So let's assume their market share goes down to 50% from the 90, and that Google TPUs take over the balance of it. Well, then you're talking about 50% of $1.5 trillion. So their revenues would be $750 billion in 2030. And right now the estimates are for $425 billion. So they've continually outperformed what people think. They're still growing their revenues at 67% year over year as of the last earnings report. And quarter over quarter, it was over 20%. So they're even going at a faster pace right now. So it's dirt cheap relative to everything I just said on a 5-year lookout. I think it's important for people first to start with since we're using the dotcom bubble, and I made a joke that, if we didn't have the dotcom bubble, there'd be nothing to compare this to. So instead, we're picking the one data point we have, and we're using that as it could be the dotcom bubble. And I think Gavin Baker did the best job of kind of isolating that and saying, hey guys, think of there was a huge amount, 97% dark fiber, meaning they were building it before we actually had the demand for everything that was going to happen. And I think the best way to convert that into something that's very visual for people to realize, everyone has heard about the China ghost cities. The ghost cities were built, and I visited them, and they were empty buildings and stuff that had already been purchased, but in some cases they never filled out. Eventually, all that dark fiber was used. So the dot-com was not a bubble. It was way ahead of the demand for it being necessary. But eventually, it all got used and moved up to higher levels. You made the point, which is 100% accurate, and I don't understand. I don't think people fully grasp it. The amount of need for AI is infinite. It will never end. It's like saying, when will you have solved every problem? If we solve going to Mars, we'll try to solve going to Saturn. We'll try to solve, there's infinite amounts of electricity that's needed to put it into that category. And right now we have capacity constraints showing up at every company level. There's not one company that either provides the cloud for it. So they all say, Google says it, Microsoft says it, Oracle says it. Oracle stock's getting hit because they can't meet the revenue demand that's coming. It is infinite. Palantir just talked about the growth and the adoption that they're seeing in their business, spreading to over 200 clients in one quarter, that many increases. it's happening at every level. So the demand side will never be the issue, particularly when you go back to what I said about transitioning from LLMs to VLMs. It is literally infinite. And whatever we come up with, there'll be more needs for it. We are literally plugging intelligence into every machine that has ever been built to make it be more efficient. So this process is going to continue. As an investor, there's really, the reason I think the electricity argument works is there's really no way to monetize where this is. I do think the Mag 7 to some degree are going to look and feel as a group a lot like utility companies. We haven't talked about it yet, but I'm going to bring it up here. I'll be doing this weekend, spending a lot of time on the Genesis mission, which the administration signed as an order last night, which to me is so important. And just so you can hear this before I move on to kind of the margin side, this is the government merging the public and private sector together. This makes AI untouchable as a build out. So if you were worried about the things you were hearing on the build out, the government basically signed an order saying this is critical for our survival relative to China. It's no longer just about rare earth. It's about everything in this VLM moment, meaning it's for biology, it's for science, it's for advanced materials, everything. Everything that they signed is opening up the 17 national labs, their data, their supercomputers to the private sector, to the foundation models. Like, it's a major, major thing to get around the states, which I thought were the ones that could delay everything. Also, to make power not an issue, or at least a focal point. We can talk about that as well. But in my opinion, the power market just became owned by the government to some degree too, because once you put this importance on AI at the top level, meaning this is for the survival of the country, it gives the president a lot of flexibility, which he likes to use and drive things to courts to defend people that are trying to stop something. So this was a maneuver specifically put in place to make sure that we can compete with China on their advancement in power and all these other issues where they really are the leaders at this point. So that whole theme, when you go through it, Felix, it's such a complex issue. And this is why I don't minimize it. When I listen to people talk about the macro side, if they can't talk about what I just talked about, I find zero value in it because it's such a critical part of everything going on. And it is challenging for investors. My focal point right now is on drug discovery and longevity and allowing people to live forever, because I think we're at the beginning stages of that. I always believe that that would be the time that the stock market is the most euphoric, is when people focus on that part of AI.
Visser highlights a dramatic shift. Governments, particularly the U.S. in his commentary, are no longer passive observers of AI infrastructure. He points to policy moves that effectively merge public and private channels, opening national labs, supercomputers, and research to foundation model development and broader private sector use. This isn't just about rare earths or isolated tech advantages, it's a comprehensive mobilization to
But eventually it ended up being completely right. And everyone that says, well, yeah, I got 2022 right being bearish. I'm like, okay, but we raised rates up. You thought there'd be a recession. We didn't get one. And stocks eventually went to new all-time highs when we had the fastest rate hike ever. And the SOM rule kicked in last year. It's still going that way. And yet we didn't get a recession. So I don't want to say it doesn't matter in the short run, because a lot of people trade off that data and they still believe it matters. And so for people trying to make money sitting there watching, it does matter. Now that I'm not sitting in front of the screen looking at it all the time, and that really stopped for me in 2013. That's when I stopped managing money officially and started managing people completely. I've cared less about it. Now, that being said, I do think the way to navigate this thing is to kind of keep in the back of your mind that all the things that you said, and let me link it this way. If you go back to when code started, I have followed let's say something that happened to me as someone who believed that the only thing to focus on was Jeffrey Moore and leading economic indicators. That all changed for me in 2013, partly because I realized China had peaked. So I knew that Europe was now in steady decline. Japan was in steady decline. China was in steady decline. And when I say steady decline, I mean, there was no growth left. And it was just demographics kind of taking over. And I believed in the whole rule that demographics drove rates lower, and they drove rates lower because when people get too old and we're not replacing people, all the things you've heard about, and that immigration was meant to offset that and try to get population growth. So I'm a student of kind of macro governments trying to keep this going. But in 2013, Amazon never going down at the same time that Mario Draghi basically did something I didn't think was possible, which is the Germans bailing out the Portuguese, the Italians, the Greeks, and Spanish. I didn't think that was ever going to happen, but it did. I realized that, number one, everyone has a printing press, so they'll find ways to do UBI in some form. Every country will be different. Number two, what the hell is going on with Amazon, that this stock, which has infinity PEs, but continues to grow market share, and it's a book company that is talking about doing retail, this spending can't work. This can't work. And I went out to Silicon Valley. I went to Singularity University, and I realized at that point it changed me forever. And I started writing papers on the fact that I have to forget the daily numbers and just not care. I think people are going to have to weight the daily numbers as a sentiment thing. Where are we in terms of sentiment regarding a recession or inflation? Because that seems to be the only pendulum. The pendulum is either we're going into a recession or we're going into some form of inflation. The Fed's either going to be cutting rates because there's a problem, or they're going to have to not cut rates and they might have to raise rates. And I believe that the majority of the time we're spending in between these two. I think inflation is completely limited on the upside and it's unlimited on the downside. And so because I believe that that's the next 5 years, is that it's limited on the upside to maybe 4% in core CPI, but we could go to zero very easily. I'm not worried about the inflation side. I actually am focused more on kind of the deflation side, and that's what brings me back to it. I think if you follow the LEI and you follow monetary policy and you get in that, and again, your show is called Forward Guidance, so I understand this might not be the, thing, but I think what you guys do is you straddle the line and you talk about these issues, and I think it is important for traders. I just don't think it's important for the end game for the macro world. The reason it's a non-issue is because it's already being recognized completely by the states, and the hyperscalers are going to pay for it. So there was a realization I had when I went through, and I forget which one of the guys running one of the frontier model companies said basically, electricity is it's not even a cost for us, meaning the money we get from selling intelligence on a margin basis is infinite. So electricity is just not a cost. Compute is a cost. Like there's the build out of the data centers is a cost, but the actual electricity is nothing. So that's the first point, is that if they had to, they'll just cover above a certain amount of the inflation. If they're driving it, which is what matters, they'll have to pay for it. They're trying to find solutions where they're doing it off-grid. So there'll be more solutions on off-grid where they're not actually using it. They're building their own supply connected to the data center. So I think people have extrapolated the recent costs and kind of said, well, this is going to be a problem. It's not going to be a problem. They're not going to let it be. Utilities are also not like a major part of the CPI. And if gas at the pump isn't going higher, and this is one of the things that, like, if I was someone on the inflation side looking for the Fed to raise rates, I don't know how you can ever raise rates if housing costs are coming down and affordability is an issue, meaning they're trying to find ways to make it go lower. At the same time that gas at the pump doesn't go higher and oil's below $60, and at the same point, wages are coming down. Like, if those three are coming down, I don't even know the argument to make about being worried about inflation at this point. And then trying to nuance the service side has moved up a tenth and this has gone through. It's just silly to me if those three are going down, and that's the simple side. And I look further ahead. So when the labor market's weak, I just think that becomes an issue. So I wouldn't worry about the utility side from that basis. I wouldn't worry about inflation in general, and the deflationary argument that people are just going to have to get through. And I think this is important. I don't know if you had a chance to. Did you see Michael Green's Substack that went viral? Yeah. I thought it was excellent. And I think if you read through it, the point that stood out the most to me is just how much the government's QE and the government's spending and forcing and financializing the economy has led to one of the greatest problems that he didn't spend a lot of time on there. But when you go through his poverty line, probably the most important change was the child care portion. And the reason the child care portion was so important is because we have a demographic issue. We have a wealth discrepancy or inequality issue. We have an obesity issue, and we now have an immigration issue. That's childcare. I mean, basically, if you're unhealthy at the age of 50, well, then you can't take care of kids and you can't do any of these service-based jobs. If you don't have immigration come in, you're losing it. If demographics, you're not replacing young people and everyone's getting older and the age is getting older. And then if you have wealth concentration where people don't need to work, this is one of the reasons why the labor participation rate has gone down. If the labor participation rate hadn't gone down since the GFC, our unemployment rate would be closer to 7 to 8% than where it currently is. So I think in general, when he wrote that paper, the most interesting part to me is how the poverty line has gone higher just at a time. And when you combine it with the AI kind of deflationary pressures coming that are driven by the job at a minimum, the lack of hiring, the lack of upside in your job, the lack of monetary, upside for an individual, it's a very deflationary kind of 70% of the people are trapped in the country in this world of just not being able to get out. And I think that's why Michael Green's piece was so important. And I think that's why socialism is starting to rage in the US and the cities.
Jordi Visser invites us to see today's markets not as another short-lived bubble, but as a pivotal turning point where infrastructure, policy, and exponential technology converge. His analysis insists we look beyond fear of overvaluation or daily macro noise and instead weigh the size of the stage upon which AI, compute, and national strategy are playing. Whether you agree with every detail of his math or the exact scale he predicts, his core message is a challenge. If you want to understand the next decade of markets, innovation, and society, you must reckon with the profound structural momentum of artificial intelligence and the new realities governments and industries are rapidly building around it.
That's it for today's look into BTC Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay on top of all the latest insights. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you in the next one.